Before we can begin a conversation about anti-racism, it might be useful to know some of the background information for Heartland itself and the surrounding Waukesha County area. So at this point, I'm going to take you through a series of slides that show migration trends, planning and development topics, and a coming to terms of some language that will be useful for our conversation and future conversations around racism and anti-racism. Some of you may or may not know, but Heartland has native beginnings. The land on which we live and worship in our church was originally inhabited by the Potawatomi tribe. They called this land Shabakwanaki because of the natural spring in the area. Here's just a few pictures. Stephen Warren was the first settler in 1838. He sold some of his shares of land to Christian Hershey, and the town became known as Hersheyville for a brief period of time, having nothing to do with chocolate. But he developed the grist mill in 1842. In 1845, there was a horse race track with a baseball diamond that drew in many people from more urban areas to see the races. So there was a lot of hospitality. Resorts were built around the lakes as people came out to vacation and partake in some of this entertainment. Moving forward quite a little bit, in 1949, the Northfield subdivision was established. And this is the neighborhood directly behind St. Charles Catholic Church, nestled in between Highway 16 and Capitol Drive. So that is one of the first neighborhoods of Heartland. And this was primarily established for commuters from Milwaukee who wanted to live out more in the country. And then we have Arrowhead High School. This is from 2020, but originally it was Heartland Union High School, and has now become what it is today with our two campuses and football field, and the large campus area that we have surrounding it. And this is, as we know, a big part of our community out here. What I'd like to discuss now are just some population growth trends, some economic development circumstances, and fair housing. What we see here on this slide are some population projections that were done in 2005, but they show projections that go up to 2035. So we can see on the orange line sort of a trend upward for Waukesha County. This includes the Lake Country area. And currently in 2020, the Lake Country area makes up about 23.3% of the Waukesha County population. And it is projected to increase to 25% by the year of 2035. And you can see the Lake Country projections there on the blue line. So between the years 2010 and 2035, Waukesha County itself is projected to experience an 11.5% increase in population. And within that, the Lake Country area is expected to increase by nearly 20%. So this is quite significant when we think about who our neighbors are going to be in the future. What will our community be comprised of? How will housing accommodate the greater population? How will schools look? All those things. And of course, we live in a pandemic now, so these numbers could change significantly depending on employment and things like that. So these are just, again, some projections from 2005 that I thought would be interesting to note. As we look at the different components of population change, we can see on the map here, Waukesha County is outlined in that big square, and just to the right of Waukesha County, you'll see Milwaukee next to the lake there, and then Heartland is where the big red dot is. Waukesha is somewhat in between the two, and you can see that with the green dot kind of in the middle. When we're talking about population change, there are two main factors that affect population. One of them is natural increase, which is the balance between births and deaths in an area over a given period of time. This is something that they call natural, but could be affected by a lot of different things: access to healthcare, aging populations, things like that. The other Second component of population change is net migration, which is the balance between migration to and from an area of a given period of time. When we think about migration, we also have to think of urbanization, especially now with changing workforces, uh, populations of people getting older, especially out in the Waukesha County area, where we're seeing a lot of the baby boomers that are retiring and having to replace having replacement workforce needed. So migration is really when population moves out of the urban areas, so out of Milwaukee, for instance, out towards Heartland, Oconomowoc, some other Waukesha County areas where the transportation isn't as accessible, as not a lot of public transportation. Businesses are more spread out. Um, there's more service industry related employment than there is manufacturing. So that's one component of that. And the other is urbanization. So it's people moving back towards the more urban areas for jobs. Like if you want to work in Milwaukee, you might move closer there so your commute isn't as long or terrible. So we're seeing some of that trend as well as the populations sort of get older in the Heartland and Lake Country and Waukesha County area. People are moving back towards the cities a little bit to be closer to the types of jobs that they're getting there. Here we have a demographic comparison. This is all from 2018 and 2019. This can be found on the census.gov website. You'll see that in the corner, I have the link there. I also have included in that link Waukesha, the city of Waukesha, just for comparison's sake. But here I have Heartland and Milwaukee. These are, very different cities. Obviously, the population is greater in Milwaukee. The diversity is greater in Milwaukee. A lot of different reasons why this happens, but just so you can see the numbers and you can compare it kind of side by side. You will notice one interesting point here. There's poverty in Heartland, and we're at about 3% right now. This looks differently than probably what you have envisioned in your mind, but there is poverty in Heartland and Waukesha County, and there is also in Milwaukee, which you'll notice is at 26.6% right now. Feel free to pause this, go take a look at that website to see how it stacks up against Waukesha County as well. And you can look at many more factors than what I have laid out here. I have reviewed a little bit of a source it's from the year 2000, so it's a bit dated, but I think some of the concepts of it might still apply. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. You can share them with me in the email or on the Facebook event page in a post if you'd like. But when we're talking about economic development in Waukesha County, there's a planning document that's several hundred pages long that I don't expect any of you to read, but Chapter 7 is sourced below there. And I thought it was interesting, their introduction to this. So I just wanted to highlight some of the language and their goals for what this economic development plan is about. Economic development is vital for the communities in Waukesha County and the village of Heartland. With optimum paying jobs and growing businesses, the village, the county, and the region will be able to maintain and expand their quality of life. In order to maintain the highest quality of life for its residents, the village of Heartland needs to foster job growth and new business development. So as we're thinking about this, I'm going to switch over to a slide that shows the village of Heartland and other business owners in the area and the citizens considered to be strengths in the area, as well as some of the concerns. And I want you to think about, when you hear these, where does your mind wander when you hear these? And are you asking, why is this a strength, or why is this a concern? What factors could be happening, behind the scenes here that attribute to some of this? What are some of the things that resonate with you? So you'll see on the left, I have strengths. There's general quality of life, low crime rates, quality education, business-related things like retention and innovation, entrepreneurship, and the superior work ethic of loyal local employees. Some of the concerns, however, are that wages are not kept at pace with cost of living in the area. There's a perception of high property taxes. There are rising healthcare costs in the area. There are practices for land use and zoning that people may not be on board with. As I mentioned earlier, there's an aging workforce that needs to be replaced. And there's a citizen's lack of understanding of business-related issues. At this time, we're going to review some of the concepts that the Fair Housing Act looks into. So one of the reports that I'm using here is from 2014, and it's entitled The Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. This was done for Waukesha County and the Home Consortium. So you'll see that in the right-hand corner there, the Home, which is a group of counties that receive funds through the HUD program and directly through this CDBG, which I'll explain in just a moment. So the Home Consortium consists of Jefferson, Ozaukee, Washington, and Waukesha counties. These Fair Housing Consortium here gets funds from the Community Development Block Grant Program, and they are required, to complete a fair housing study, and this is known as the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. And it's to ensure that housing and urban development programs are being administered in a way that furthers fair housing for protected classes. So one of their founding and grounding sort of policies that exist here in regards to Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which you can read down below, so you can familiarize yourself with that. In 1988, it includes, it was amended to include familial status and disability. Again, the source is below if you want to look into this further. The things that this study did some analysis on is socioeconomic and segregation analysis. These are not all of the findings that I'm listed, but these are some that I just pulled out that seem to really speak to some of the issues that we're looking at for this conversation. So for each county in the Home Consortium, Hispanic was the primary ethnic minority group. So you can, again, go back and review some of that census data, and it'll show you where those numbers came from. Each county, however, reported less than 10% of its residents belonging to a racial ethnic group other than white. So while the primary group was Hispanic, there are less than 10% of the residents that actually are Hispanic. Methodologies used to do the analysis indicated low levels of segregation among the minority and white residents in each county, but a high level of isolation for white residents with very limited levels of exposure to minority populations. So while some of you might think that you already knew this, and that's probably true, we typically know that we're very segregated from Milwaukee County, for instance, where it is more diverse. I just put a kind of a picture of that so we could really understand what that is. But that was one of the findings from the analysis. Also, they looked at public infrastructure and education. And investment in the community. So just to kind of acknowledge that Waukesha Metro Transit provides public transportation across the city of Waukesha and contracts with Wisconsin Coach Lines and 2 routes of the Milwaukee Transit into Waukesha County. So many of you have seen those on the highway. We have the Gerke's Corners bus stop, and we have the Wisconsin Coach Lines that go out to Madison. Interestingly enough, there was in 1922 a commuter bus that came from Milwaukee into the Heartland area as people moved out that way and began to build homes out here. And that was during the completion of Highway 19, which, as far as I know, no longer exists. So something happened in between that time and now. And it would be interesting to find out more about the history of how that ended. In addition, regards to education, all 4 counties in the Home Consortium have low enrollment of racial and ethnic minority students, so that also might be a surprise to some of you. Of those enrolled, however, graduation rates tend to be lower and more support services are needed to serve this population of students. So at this point, we might be asking ourselves, why is that? Why are we not finding the racial and ethnic minority students out in our area? And when we do, why is it that the graduation rates tend to be lower? And why are more support services needed? I think the main question here is just to look at why. And so I'm hoping that Pastor Carr can maybe shed some light on some of those aspects that we can look at. So they also looked at housing profiles and home mortgage analysis. And while I am not a numbers person, here we can see that while substandard living conditions are low for Waukesha County, further analysis indicated areas in which residents of racial and ethnic minority groups experience disproportionately greater need in relation to housing problems, even when income is taken into account. So again, this might be a good point to ask, why are these groups experiencing this disproportionately greater need than others in Waukesha County? Also, when they looked at mortgage rates, approval and denial rates, really, they found some interesting, I thought they were interesting statistics. So they found low income single applicants, male or female, had greater rates of approval and lower rates of denial than lower income co-applicants, so male and female co-applicants. So that might be just two people co-applying for a loan. That could be a married couple. They didn't specify. When the income was higher, however, the situation was reversed. So in higher income single male or female applicants, there was a lower approval rate, higher denial rate than higher income co-applicants. So that was just an interesting statistic that I pulled out. But with regards to race and ethnicity, they compared loan outcomes and found that there was a 14.5% gap in approval rates between low-income white and low-income minority applicants. The next topics here, they in this report, they look at all the impediments that they could find to fair housing, things that would block the ability to provide fair housing to this group of people under these grants. They did pull out that barriers are largely systemic and will require effort from both private and public sector actors to correct. So I just wanted to pull that out, that this is not, and we might already know this is not due to just surface level things, that we have to ask the question why to get to sort of the real issues happening. One of the impediments that they found was that zoning regulations and housing mix ratios that reduce opportunities for housing development. So these are things like zoning where you cannot have multifamily housing units. So I'm wondering how these limits either promote or prohibit the quality of life that Lake Country is used to seeing and experiencing. And that's another impediment that they find, imbalance between job centers and affordable housing options. So those kind of go hand in hand. The other impediment that they found is a lack of fair housing knowledge. So this is really applying to people that are maybe facing discrimination or don't have a lot of information about their options when it comes to fair housing. They don't know where they can find information or how to file a complaint. And also the social service agencies and housing providers that they go to mentioned some things, but most were unsure of where to refer complaints if those existed. And the last thing that I wanted to point out, the last impediment, is that they found this NIMBY, which stands for not in my backyard, and prejudice attitudes that could hinder fair housing opportunity. So I just want to read here that input received through interviews and meetings with over 50 stakeholders in the 4 county study areas reveal that opposition to affordable housing by general public, whether due to economic and or racial or ethnic prejudices, is prevalent in many areas. A variety of stakeholders included elected officials, city and county staff, housing developers, and community development workers. They describe these not in my backyard sentiments and a lack of understanding about affordable workforce and mixed income housing as common among study area residents. So again, this has to do with probably lack of understanding and knowledge about fair housing, but also just the prejudice attitudes that do exist. And again, Pastor Akara can probably speak to that more on a personal level as well. So the next thing we want to go through are some common terms that we'll find in these discussions that some of you may or may not know. They're fairly quite detailed, but I am finding that we might not have as good of an understanding on these terms as we think, and it would be helpful to just have a common base knowledge before going into this conversation with Pastor Kara. So following is a non-exhaustive list. So I pulled out just a few of the more common ones, but you can again go to that link below there and find a whole mass of terms related to this subject. So really, how do we define racism? And where are our blind spots? We have a variety of different areas of racism: cultural racism, individual, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized racism. And then there's some other areas here that we can look at. So it's race prejudice plus a social and institutional power, a system of advantage based on race. So this is where you might hear terms like white privilege come into play. A system of oppression based on race, and a white supremacy system. It's different. Racism is different from racial prejudice, hatred, or discrimination. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systemic discrimination through the institutional policies and practices of the society. And in doing so, we shape the cultural beliefs and values that support these policies and practices. So here's white privilege. I know that some of you might kind of cringe a little when you hear this, and perhaps it's due to just not a strong understanding of what that means because of maybe how you've heard it used or referred to, or people talking about it in a way that's not quite accurate. So this really refers to the unquestioned and unearned set of advantages, entitlements, benefits, and choices bestowed upon people solely because they are white. Generally, white people who experience such privilege do so without being conscious of it. You can see that it is structural. And again, just like racism, there's interpersonal white privilege, cultural white privilege, and institutional white privilege. And I'll pause here and give you a moment just to read that if you'd like. So here's some additional terminology. I'm not going to read these all, but I will pause for a little while so that you can take a look at them. If you have questions that you coming up along the way, or you have thoughts, keep track of those. Those are really important for your own self-growth and understanding. If you've got questions that come up, you can feel free to email me. My email is at the end of this program. And we can ask Pastor Kara when we meet with her on Monday. Our first term here is ally. So ally and anti-racism are really what this conversation with Pastor Kara is all about. We're going to be asking ourselves, how can we, as people in the Heartland area community, in the Waukesha, the larger Waukesha area and Lake Country communities, be allies to our Black brothers and sisters? How can we be anti-racists? How can we help complete and do the work of anti-racism that is necessary for building a better world today? Here's another term that we've heard a lot about lately, the Black Lives Matter. It is a political movement to address systemic and state violence against African Americans. There's a little bit more detail about its background, kind of what the mission is, what its ideological and political stances are. And I am going to ask Pastor Cara to speak a little bit more about this and how Black Lives Matter is different than All Lives Matter. Here's just a few more common terminology or terms that you might have heard. We talk a lot about inclusion and how this is how we want to be more inclusive. Well, what does that really mean, and what are the things that we should be looking at to be more inclusive? So you can read that there. We have racial equity, what that's about, and then microaggressions. This term is also maybe sometimes used in ways that seem a little bit offensive to people. But you can read about that and what it's really focusing on, and maybe think about how you have experienced some microaggressions that maybe you weren't aware of before. So that's last slide. Thank you for hanging in there with me. Next, on Monday, we're going to have a conversation with Pastor Cara Baylor, who is sometimes known as the Pissed Off Pastor. She has a blog, and the link is there for you to look at. And she writes about her own experiences about what's going on in the world with regards to her experiences on racial issues and things like that. She is also the campus minister at Carthage College in Kenosha, and we are excited to have her with us on Monday. Again, if there are questions that arise for you between now and Monday, feel free to share them on the Facebook event page if you've RSVP'd to that. And if not, feel free to hop over there and do so. Or you can email me at interntracy@oursaviors.org. I would be happy to pass those on to Pastor Cara so that she can be prepared to answer them for us. I look forward to seeing you all on Monday. Thank you.